giving our breaking teams a round of applause for making it this far?
Should we do introduction before we?
Sure.
I'm Amber. I use she, her pronouns. I'm going to be the first speaker from Berkeley, which is Deb.
I'm Zach. I use he, him pronouns. I'm going to be second for Berkeley.
I'm Xander. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm going to be the first speaker for Aragon.
I'm Isha. I use she, her pronouns, and I'll be the second speaker on the opposition for Aragon.
The thing you text me is relevant, right?
It's fine.
I strongly affirm the motion that the United States federal government should allow members of armed forces to unionize. So, the plan is just repeal the part of the U.S. Code that stipulates that members of armed forces cannot unionize and replace it with a part of the code saying that they can. Unionization is just coming together as a collective bargaining group where members pay to union leaders who represent them and bargain for them with their employers. And we believe the weighing mechanism here should be net benefits, or what creates the most amount of good for the most amount of people. Our first contention is protecting members of the armed forces. Let's look at what their quality of life is like right now. The pay for an individual in the armed forces who is in their first year of being in the armed forces, the base pay is $20,000 a year, which is about $10,000 below the poverty line in the U.S. And even if you become an officer, even then your base pay is still $30,000.
POC.
Yeah.
Sorry, when you say armed force member, can you define that a little more clearly, or are we talking like just an?
Oh,
can you
so
define
the
that
military
for us?
actually has the same pay scale for all
Oh,
departments.
no, it's not. It's just for definitions. It's
Oh.
just any member of the Army, the Navy, what are the other
Air
ones?
Force.
The Air Force.
The Space Force. That's one more.
All of the people with
Okay,
guns.
okay.
The people with guns and bombs and things.
Alright.
They do the fighting. Yeah. Okay. Where was I? Hold on. So even if you become an officer, even then, your base pay is going to be $38,000 a year, which is only $8,000 above the annual poverty line. Furthermore, your working conditions are horrible. Obviously, if you're deployed, your life is constantly in danger. But even if you're on a base, there have been significant cases of asbestos in bases that the U.S. federal government is refusing to fix. That's why veterans make up about 1/3 of the mesothelioma cases within the United States, which is the disease that you get from being exposed to asbestos for a long amount of time. And then let's look at what happens once you get out of the military. Veteran care is absolutely atrocious. Getting anything paid for is nearly impossible. There are nearly no resources for people to get access to mental health care. And then also we see that there is significantly more poverty and people who are unhoused within veterans, simply because there isn't enough support for them paid by the U.S. federal government. The second thing we see in the status quo is there is absolutely no route to advocacy for these individuals. Right now, when we don't have a draft, there's no advocacy because the people who go into the military tend to be predominantly from the lowest income brackets within the United States. They are the most unrepresented and marginalized people that don't have the power politically within the U.S. to advocate for themselves. Furthermore, just the chain of the command makes it incredibly hard for you to advocate for yourself. This is why things like the My Lai massacre in Vietnam was covered up for years, because despite the fact that soldiers went through the proper routes of communicating what had happened, that they had been forced to massacre everyone they saw, the leadership did not respond. The only way they got anything done was by, after years public, and even then they faced repercussions from the United States federal government for going public. And then there's the other world where there's a draft. In this world, you literally are forced into working conditions that are terrible, and you don't have any way out of it because you're drafted. So what happens when the plan passes? Basically, there is opportunity for advocacy. When groups unionize, they have collective bargaining power, and they have union leaders that are dedicated people who are union leaders and union lawyers who are working consistently to advocate for them. They have a body that is completely designed to make sure that their voices are heard, that their concerns are heard, and that they are taken care of. Furthermore, we think they have incredibly large amounts of bargaining power because the United States federal government really needs its people in the military. They're not going to say, fine, you can all quit, because then we wouldn't have any military. The United States federal government is going to do basically whatever it takes to ensure that the people in their military continue being willingly in their military. So what are the impacts here? We say basically it's less death and less dehumanization. People can bargain to ensure that they are paid better, fed better, that they are living in better working conditions, that once they become a veteran, they will be taken care of. And overall, their quality of life will go up. The second contention is that allowing bargaining power will make the military better. 3 reasons here. First off, as I already proved to you, these people will be taken better care of while they're in the military. So we think that under better working conditions, they are going to be able to work better, right? If you're working on a base where you're getting poisoned with asbestos every single day, you're probably gonna work a lot worse than if you were just healthy because everything around you was healthy working conditions. So we think the military functions better and is able to run operations better, which is beneficial to the United States federal government and people in the US. Second, we think people will have more dedication simply because people are more dedicated to leaders who they feel are actually care about them and have care about them and will listen to them. But third, the military becomes more attractive because the quality of life of people in the military is better. It will become more attractive to be in the military, and more people will willingly join the military. Why does this matter? In the status quo, in 2022, the military missed its recruiting mark by 40,000 people, and in the past 30 years, there have been $300 billion spent by the United States federal government on private military contractors. This goes away in our world where more people join the military willingly. We don't have to rely on private military contractors, and so there will be less rates of sexual assault and war crimes committed by the U.S. military. Thank you.
So wait, before I start my audit's right outside. Can I let her just sit on the chair? Is that okay with you?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Okay. Sorry about that. Alright. So quick order, if that's okay with judges. I'm going to be having 2 observations before I start, 2 disadvantages, and then going with the affirmative. Is anybody not ready? Okay. My time begins in 3, 2, 1. 2 observations on the government case before we get started. First up, we want to differentiate the idea of the military and a company which has unions. This is especially important for a couple of reasons. First off, the military isn't necessarily as profit-driven as a company would be. meaning that they don't use workers as a means of production for some sort of product. Why is this important? It means that the military also understands the value of having soldiers, and as such, cater their policies to make sure that soldiers aren't going through inhumane treatment and try to preserve as many soldiers' lives as possible. The second observation that can be made on the government case is that the United States is that I think that SI government drastically underestimates the size of the U.S. military and how the United States, what will happen if people do unionize. What we do believe is that since the United States Armed Forces is so big, and they do only have the fiat to make sure that unionizing is allowed, even if some people try to unionize, and they strike, for example, they will likely not be allowed to, they will likely be kicked from the military because they are not honoring their commitment when they volunteer to sign for the military.
Wait, POC, stop the time. So just on this argument, I'm sort of unclear what the advocacy is. Is the argument just that, they're going to strike before they unionize and then they're just gonna get kicked out,
No,
or the
so-
unionization?
Well, also I'd like to clarify, it's an overview, not like an advantage, so if that helps.
Yeah,
you follow.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, the advocate. Do you want more clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
What we're saying is that since the United States you guys can feel through that, you can allow it, but you can't force people to join it, obviously. So if some.
So you guys can't
Yeah.
fiat people to unionize, you fiat that they have the power
Yeah,
to.
exactly.
Sure.
Okay. My time continues in 3, 2, 1. That being said, let's get into the disadvantages. The first disadvantage is that it's bad for soldiers. The A point under this is reduced operational flexibility. What we tell you is that unions introduce blockades and lots of processes and negotiation delays that handle military ability to swiftly respond to overseeing action. What does this mean? It's more difficult for the military to do their job because they can't be as swift and responsive if they have to go through negotiation processes and also have to be able to deal with a lot of union members. The B point under this is that it leads to division among soldiers. Unionization leads to division among soldiers based on different priorities. This means that soldiers who make disruptive statements ruins the actual cohesion and morale of a certain unit. This is important to us because we think that in a status quo, units need to be able to be cohesive, but unions introduce some form of politicization, which can actually mean that there's going to be more people who disagree with what their union is doing, and that might ruin the cohesion and the ability of the military to work together. The C point here is legal challenges and disputes. We basically argue here that repealing the U.S. code is generally not a great thing because it's built up so that people are able to, so that people are able to follow the federal laws. When you start to repeal one U.S. code, that can enter a slippery slope where lots of U.S. codes are being revealed, or it creates a norm where we can now repeal a lot of the U.S. code. The D point here is costs. We think that evidence suggests that more money is spent combating military unions, which actually leads to the more military funding necessary, and that's really harmful because even in the United States, we already spend billions and billions of dollars on the military constantly. There's no need to increase its expenditures for this type of cost. And then the E point under this is that we think that it leads to politicization. We tell you that unions almost always become politicized on issues, and this ruins the nature of the apolitical nature that the military is supposed to follow. This is incredibly harmful because this means that the military can't make, can't make an ability to respond to things swiftly if they feel politicized over the issue. Okay, and then the F point here is that it becomes stigmatized. We think that although side government has the fiat to make it allowed, they can't make it so that people can actually, they can't fiat through that people will join it. Therefore, the issue will just overall become stigmatized because if you start a union, you look like you're going against your country and trying to fight your own country, which is, again, against the advocacy of a lot of these military forces because they are volunteering for the United States military to fight for it. Then, on the disadvantage number 2 here, we think that it's generally worse for the military. Sorry, I have a lot to get through. A disruption of chain of command and discipline. We say that the core military principle is a strict adherence to orders and a clear chain of command. Collective bargaining and the possibility of strikes could make this structure and lead to hesitation or disobedience in critical situations. The B point under this is that it leads to loyalty and civilian control. Military services need to be a commitment to the nation and civilian authorities. Unions would cause divisions so service members could prioritize union interests over military orders. The C point is the efficacy of unions. There's no precedence or solvency of making good change. This exists in Europe through the European Organization of Military Associations and trade unions, which is a host of issues over the history. Here's 4, for example. First up, coordination issues, different political affiliations and opinions, lessened communication and cooperation. They weren't able to respond to security threats and crises. The second is that they weren't able to get adequate funding and resources. The third is an overlap with existing organizations. NATO solved for the environment. NATO solved for the
Oh, for EuroMenlo, which is the organization.
For EuroMenlo, which is the organization, and you would for anything. And the fourth point here is that there's limited influence, there's no precedence for unions, perception of power, they can't actually make change. The D point here finally is that it directly hurts the military, it reduces effectiveness through strikes, and the apolitical nature of the military leads to like unhomogeneous action, which you can cross-apply from a first advantage. And then the impacts here is one, more polarized military, it reduces cohesion of morale, it means that there's a difficulty in recruiting talent, it also leads to a general distrust in the military. People feel they're not actually like, if the military isn't actually going to be able to defend them when it comes to service. Some more impacts here are the United States hedge is going down because more conflict internationally. There means there's less spread of democracy and they give up international control. We also think that there's going to be more conflict as a result. People are going to see this as a vulnerability in the United States military and not being able to be effectively prepared for action, meaning that there's going to be more destruction and more conflict. And finally, we think there's going to be more vulnerability for attack in general. That being said, let's get over my opponent's advantages and talk about them for a little bit. First up, they give you a very base salary, which is $20,000. Again, we want to note that like joining the armed forces is a volunteer job that people do a lot of the time, and some people join it because they want to feel the need to defend their military, not actually for the money. Then we would offer, again, these are base salary positions. Lots of people throughout their military career move up and get paid more. They don't really tell you how much you get paid if you move up, but I mean, I think you could guess it would be much higher. Additionally, like you're working for the United States military, which means you're living there a lot of the time, so some of this doesn't make that much sense because like you are actually living there 24/7. Additionally, they say the working conditions are horrible and there's a significant cause of some diseases that they talk about. What we would like to note is that on the point of diseases, they're like, again, by the fact that the US military like cares about protecting its soldiers because they need their soldiers. That's how they fight, that's how they defend themselves. So like if there is a present threat of disease, I would bet that the United States is actually doing something to stop it. And even then we would say that like there is actually some effort from outside organizations to stop it. It doesn't necessarily need to be a labor. It doesn't need to be the soldiers who are the ones putting themselves at risk of being discharged from the military in order to solve this issue. Then we also point that when they talk about no room for the advocacy, and you have to like advocate for yourself, and they talk about the My Lai massacre, again, what we point out is we still don't think there's a solvency here on the part of the military, on the part of forces. Why is this? Again, crossed by the response that I give you, which is like, even if you join this union, A, it's stigmatized, and B, they're like likely, because there's so many soldiers, and if you're that much of a threat towards the United States, you're likely just gonna be dismissed from service, which doesn't do anything. In fact, it only worsens the quality of life for the soldier. Therefore, there is no advocacy for a labor union too. We don't think they're as effective as an outside or an external organization who is able to then combat the problem, which we think is already happening in status quo. There's tons of organizations that work with veterans and allow them to be reintegrated into society. Yes, those could be funded more, but that's an issue for a different day. We think that that's not actually like, their labor unions don't uniquely solve for that either. On the advantage number 2, again, we think that like, we don't actually think it makes the military better. Cross-apply how we say that like, it's not gonna make the operations and they're not gonna be as military ready in the future. They say that military is more attractive. We don't think that people join the military for the labor unions. There's no precedent for that. Therefore, for these reasons, I urge a strong vote for side opposition. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. I'm gonna start.
Can I get your orders out?
Oh, sorry. We good? Okay. Cool. Okay, I'm gonna start on the last thing my opponent said, and then I'm gonna do more structured stuff. Sorry, my opponent just said there's no precedent for people joining the US military before the unions. That's because they're not allowed to have unions. It's not allowed. Okay, let's get into the actual case. I'm gonna talk about our case, and then I'm gonna talk about their case. Okay. Basically, actually no. First, the observation. Yeah. Okay, so they observe that we cannot force people to join a union. We think that's correct. We think there's plenty of like military battalions that just like won't decide to unionize. We think that's totally fine. That's within their right. We see that overall, not that many workers in the U.S. choose to unionize. It's not that big a deal, right? We can see that, you know, yeah, obviously not every military personnel is going to unionize. But what we see is that when they do, they're going to reap the benefits. So let's talk about that. They also observe that the military military is not a for-profit corporation. The military does not see its people as a means to an end. It doesn't see them as a means to a profit. It does see them as a means to an end. It sees them as something even worse than a means to profit. It sees them as a means to war. It sees them as like expendable bodies. That is way worse. And we can see this in the fact that, you know, military pay sucks, military benefits suck, veteran benefits suck, the military bases suck, the working conditions are awful, right? clearly the military does not actually value the well-being of its personnel, it just values their ability to like do war. Okay. Let's.
Do you know why?
Yeah.
Do you think that, oh wait, just a yes or no?
Yeah.
Do you think the fact that they're having lower enrollment incentivizes them to cause reform if they know that they're spending all of this money to like hire people and because people aren't?
Well, they haven't. Okay, so case. Let's talk about, okay, so Xander says, you don't do it for the money, right? You go into the military, you only get paid 20K, but it's okay because you care about your country so much. Here's the thing, first of all, we want to be incentivizing people to join, right? Yes, some people join because they want to do it for the country, but clearly that's not enough. Again, 40,000 people below the recruitment, below the recruitment goals in 1 year, right? And most of these people are in the lowest income bracket. They actually are attracted to higher wages. We think that that's uniquely good. Also, just it's good to get paid more money. We think that that improves the quality of people's lives. Even if you're not doing it for the money, it's nice to have some more money. Now, they talk about how housing is provided, so it's, basically the salary gets better because you're effectively not paying for housing. We would say, yes, but the housing is really bad. The housing is U.S. military bases, or if you're on active duty, it's, it's really bad, right? Obviously, because you're in a war zone. We would say that that's not really a good counter-argument. They also talk about how pay probably gets better as you go up the ladder. Here's the thing, it does, but it's not that much better. So when I was looking at the U.S. military pay chart, I told my partner, oh, it's only 45K if you're, if you're an active personnel member. That's wrong. It is 20K is the baseline. 45K is for the highest ranking officers, right, on that pay chart. It is when you move up the ranks, you are still getting, again, only a little bit more than above the poverty line. The pay doesn't get better. They talk about how, and obviously unions will fix this. They talk about how the U.S. military obviously is just solving the asbestos problems. They have no warrant for this, and it cares about the well-being of their soldiers. Again, they have no warrant for this, and we've proven they don't. They're not solving for the asbestos problems, but they're also just not solving for general workplace safety problems because, it's a military base. And also, all this stuff they talk about how the chain of command is super rigid and you can't question authority, that is why problems don't get solved within the military. They talk about how that makes the military stronger. No, it doesn't. That is the system which leads to the current system of problem solving within the military, which is just that they throw money at a problem and hope it goes away. No, when you actually have people advocating for themselves, you're going to get better workplace safety. That's how you're going to get it, is through unions. They talk about, they say basically if you try to unionize, you're just going to be dismissed, right? We would say that a lot of union busting tactics are illegal. Also, once a union is formed, you can't be dismissed for being in a union. It's basics. That's illegal. Okay, they talk about, They talk about, so basically on veterans, they don't really have a response to the fact that, veterans in America, we've totally failed them. There's 1.2 million of them in poverty. The same number don't have access to any health insurance. You've got so many of them with untreated mental health problems, right? We just don't provide for them at all. And uniquely, we solve for this because unions obviously are going to fight for veteran benefits because everyone in the military union is going to be a veteran one day. So they say, it's just non-unique. We have veteran organizations. Clearly, these veteran organizations are not doing enough, and also we are the only ones uniquely providing any solvency for getting veteran benefits up. They talk about, and then so this is going to segue into their case. They say on our contention, basically cross-apply everything they said on how the U.S. military gets way worse and gets super ineffective. So let's go on to that argument, which is on the op case. They say, so basically their entire argument here is just this sort of generalization that, unions make everything way slower and they make it less flexible. They're not able to provide any specifics on this, and I just don't think a lot of this is well-founded. Right? We would say that the union does not hold a meeting for every single decision that the army makes, and even if it does, a lot of the times it just wouldn't have the power to dispute those things. We also would just say you know, with respect to like a lot of these things, they talk about the politicization of the military. Are you kidding me? The military does war. That's the most political thing there is. But also when we talk about the division of people within the military, I mean, like, look, you know, yes, this is true. Like sometimes you won't have large support for the union, but in that case, the union just doesn't form, right? So it's not a big issue. I don't see why this is such a big issue. Also, if you want to talk about division and discontent within the military, you should look to the chain of command, which is what they cite in their second convention. Again, this super rigid chain of command they talk about, that they praise, where like everyone is just like yes sir, and they like just obey everything to a T. It's bad, and it creates a lot of problems. It creates things like the cover-up of the My Lai massacre. It creates things like just a bunch of asbestos in all the bases because no one was willing to tell their general, hey man, you're putting poison in all the bases, right? They talk about how there's no efficiency, there's no coordination. Again, there's no warrant for this. They tell you that NATO solves Euromil. I think this is them citing an example, but I just like don't understand the example. I think that they basically talk about European military unions, saying like European military unions are just lead to the exact things we're saying. Again, they're being super general and they're not citing specifics. So I don't think there's reason to believe them. That's just citing them. Oh, stigmatization. What is that again? Oh yeah, the idea that people just don't like unions and you're going to be stigmatized. First of all, I think joining the military becomes less stigmatized because more people will do it because they will have better benefits and they will have more of a motivation to do it. But also, in terms of unionization being stigmatized within the military, I mean, maybe that happens again as we see. We can't fiat that everyone unionizes. What we do see is that when they do, they reap the benefits.
Can I give an off time myself? Okay. Okay.
Are you good?
I'm good. So, a couple things. First of all, I love POIs on verbal, and I also have a lot to get through, so you can ask them. If you can take them, great. If I don't take them, it's really just because I have a lot to get through, and I don't want to speak for you. As an off-time roadmap, I'm going to give an overview. It's really just solvency. There are 4 points under it. I will float on your voters your new sheet. Yeah, and then we're going to do gov case them off. So overview, gov off. Everything will be in order. Arguments. I'll be just rearranging my papers. Okay. You guys good?
Totally.
My time starts now. The impacts of this are simple. Both of us want better things for people in the military. But the only way they can achieve that is by telling you that the unions will cause change. And I'm going to tell you 4 specific reasons on why that's not true. First, the mechanism they have to cause change is collective bargaining, in which they say, do this or we'll strike. But here's the thing. The only precedent in this round for a military union that we bring up is Euromil. Euromil isn't even allowed to strike because it's a security risk. We read to you over and over that if the entire military got up and was like, hey, unless you pick our asbestos, we're not fighting tomorrow, that's really uniquely bad for the US. So we'll tell you that either they don't have that right to do that because that's the precedent we have set, or they do have the right to do that, which in case is like a giant security nightmare for the United States military. And the other thing is, I can't imagine a world in which we genuinely say we're all going to strike and then the US military accepts every single demand. Because if it was that easy and that quick, they would have already gotten rid of the asbestos. So look to the fact that they don't really have leverage in any sort of collective bargaining or this methodology, meaning they have no solvency. Second reason they have no solvency, they have no reason of efficacy. We only have one example brought up of military organizations, which was Euromil. And we give you 4 specific conceded reasons on why it didn't work. They have nothing to get up here and tell you of why these will work. So if you don't buy efficacy, buy the fact that we have enough independent offense, by the way, it's going to be bad for the military to do this, then there's no offense on their side. Third thing, we have this sort of double bind. Either they tell you that nobody joins, in which case we don't make into all of these impacts about strikes and big issues, but in that case, nobody causes change. If you really want to get rid of these big issues like the asbestos and the veteran stuff, you need a lot of people to stand up and do that. But if you have a lot of people to stand up and do that, you link into all the magnitude impacts that we read. So either you do too much and have these big strikes, and the US military falls apart, or you do too little and you don't affect change, meaning that they have no solvency. Fourth reason, the masking effect. We tell you that there's already some current awareness. The fact that a bunch of teenagers in 20 minutes can find out about asbestos shows that there is some sort of like lit online that's easily accessible. However, if the military says, hey, we gave you a way to advocate for yourselves, that I gave you 3 reasons why it's not like efficient and or it's not going to actually cause change, we see that they're going to call it a day. They're going to say, we did this, we don't need to do future action to help your advocacy because we did this for you. So there is an actual negative, tangible harm by doing this because you lose the probability of doing things in the future. Okay, on their case, we get 2 things on Xander's overview from Zach. They said that not everyone will unionize. They concede this really cleanly. If they tell you that not everyone will unionize, they tell you that they don't have enough backing for their big impacts. If it's going to take 100 people, I have a lot to get through, I'm so sorry, to like push a ball up a hill and they can only tell you that 2 people are going to do it, then you can't be Sisyphus. Okay, second thing, they tell you they're not a company and they say they're expendable bodies, that's even worse. But here's the thing. Once again, 4 teenagers can tell you that they spent so much money hiring out people. They know this. Like, we had military recruiters at our school the entire year because they were so low on people. They know that there are issues, so there's going to be change. Zach tells you that they haven't been incentivized in the status quo, yet the statistic they read was from 2022 to 2023, meaning that it's so recent that that doesn't show that there's enough time for them to do things for this. That there's no justification why there won't be a change in the future. Okay, now specifically on the case. I think we all agreed on definitions. I think that was all fine. Advantage 1, they say protecting the armed forces. They give examples of the pay. First of all, we see that the fact that someone pays for your housing and probably your food is one of 2 of your biggest costs. Think of the cost of living, like, we're from California. Crazy, crazy high. Like your mortgage and your rent or buying your house is one of your biggest expenses in your high your life. And so of course their income is going to be adjusted based off the fact that they don't pay living expenses and they don't pay buy food either. And yes, they're paid too little, but the only way they could have solvency to make more money is if a bunch of people stood up and said pay us more. But they don't tell you that a bunch of people are going to stay up and pay you more. Zach says not everyone's going to come together and unionize in their overview. Sorry? I have so much to I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Then they tell you there's these horrid working conditions, but once again, the ball that they're pushing up the Sisyphean hill is so big. To actually change the asbestos, if there's already people fighting for it, everyone in the military would have to stand up and say, do this, right? Like, everyone would have to say, we're not living in these barracks. And the fact is, if they can hire people to do these jobs, if they can hire this out, it shows that those people function as strikebreakers, right? Like, if you can hire out your military people because your people won't serve, then those people will work in the current working traditions without fighting, which is exactly why unions haven't worked in the past when you have strikebreakers working to work at like a lower wage or in worse conditions, because then what's the leverage of a strike if you can't collectively bargain your way out of it? Okay. So I tell you that you don't have enough solvency to whack out on any of those harms. They tell you that we don't solve, and then they tell you that after the military that veteran care really sucks. First of all, I think there's a lot of attention to this in the status quo, but we haven't seen a lot of change. Like, you've had veterans insurance, and there's alleged veteran advocacy, and I don't see a point at which there may be unions with not that many people will push this over a brick. They don't terminalize any of their impacts or show you a link team to show you that they do enough to cause these big issues. The things they read you that are problems are huge, and they just don't meet the burden of solvency for the 4 reasons I read you in my overview. Okay, on B, they said that there's no route to advocacy in the United States, and they give you examples of like the My Lai massacre. But here's the thing. Will a union sit together and say, hey, we're not going to massacre someone? I think that someone's probably going to talk about that in the status quo. You're going to see the same thing with someone that dissents against what something like there's really big actions they're going to cover up. They're going to face the same repercussions they did before the My Lai massacre, meaning that they have no solvency to change that. We don't understand how unions are going to prevent massacres in the future because if people already didn't want to massacre in the first place, there's no avenue to not doing this. If you don't have even people, or you can't prove that the unions are going to be affected. Okay, on impacts, they read pretty much the stock ones of like death and dehumanization, better working conditions, but once again, they have no solvency, and they basically just say that there's going to be huge amounts of bargaining power because people aren't going to want to quit and they're going to use lawyers to help. Lawyers already are doing this through nonprofits. They don't have this bargaining power for everything I read you about strikes because either they have too much and it's a huge security risk and then we lose a bunch of wars because if everyone's striking with the military, who's going to protect us? Or we don't have anything at all. So they have no solvency on either side. Okay, advantage 2 was essentially better for military because they say they're better taken care of. They can't access their impacts unless they can prove solvency, which they don't for 4 reasons. And then they tell you that if you're going to feel more burdened and be more dedicated. I don't think that's true. I think everything Xander reads you about politicalization means that you're going to be split up into 2 groups. You're going to feel like you're either on the out for not being in the union, or feel like you're being in the out for being in the union, meaning that you're not going to feel dedicated. You're going to have this apoliticalization that's going to tear apart the military. You're not going to have the sort of like structure you used to have of like the framework of following command anymore, which is going to lead to like less of that close military family thing and more division. Third point they said is the military becomes more attractive and more people will join. I don't think so. Because of all the massing effect stuff I read, we're going to see burden on the soldiers to fix it. That's the unique harm of making the soldiers advocate. If they tell you, you soldiers who are in the union have to fix it instead of helping outside aid, well, these people are already trying to fight to save our country, that's a huge burden to put on the soldiers. And the masking effect shows that there's going to be less future action, meaning that the military is going to become less attractive because people aren't going to want to join. And the impact is out to sexual assault, but they really don't give a link, so I don't know how we got there, but you're there. Don't flow through because there's no links. Okay, on our side, we get a couple things. Zach says that the disruption of the change of man is bad because we've had asbestos in the My Lai massacre, but here's where it falls. They don't do anything to change this chain of command. The union still has to go up to the chain of command and say, do what you want. They're operating within a system that they tell you is harmful. They're not causing meaningful change. Okay, second thing, on loyalty and civilian control, they say union busting is legal, but I can think the U.S. military does not always do what's legal. The fact that Zach here said the My Lai massacre happened shows that we can't trust the military to be a rational actor and not union bust. So we see that there's chances that the unions can get shut down. Third, advocacy of the union, they said that it doesn't work that way and they don't understand the EuroMill context. The context is it's the only comparative we have and we prove that it doesn't happen. Impacts of disadvantage, we tell you that there's literally going to be war if we don't think that the United States loses a mutually assured destruction. They have no solvency for the 4 reasons I read you in my overview. For the masking effect, for the double bind, for the past precedent, for the efficacy, for everything. They have no solvency, they have no impacts. They urge you to vote opposition today. Thank you. Yeah.
Or like on this or something?
It's actually,
Or like on case.
where am I supposed to go?
No, I just need this.
Okay. This was this.
Yeah. Okay.
Where? Can I just
On this.
write those words?
Okay, quick order. I'm gonna be going down 4 reasons why Gov can't win your ballot in this debate, or why I don't think Gov should win your ballot in this debate round, and then 3 reasons why an opposition win is probable. Is anybody not ready? My time begins in 3, 2, 1. If you should take anything out of the government case, you should take the fact that there is no solvency in this round. He should give you a very good double bind, which should simply seal the fact that there likely is no solvency to these labor unions. She tells you that if they do too much, strikes occur in mass numbers, then their solvency falls apart because they can see that you can simply hire out the jobs to other people as the military currently does. But then she says if there's nothing, then there is no solvency, period. So either they do a lot and then they actually lose their jobs because they just get hired out, or they do nothing and then we have no military and then there is no solvency to any of the problems that they bring out, or we have a really bad situation where people are unhappy in the military but staying there because they don't want to strike, and then when something happens, all cohesion breaks apart. The second thing that you should look at here is the fact that they don't provide an actual advocacy as to why you should be preferring them. We tell you that instead of now, you can just have people say there's no bargaining power because the idea that strikes are improbable, as we tell you. If there is no bargaining power because people are not joining in mass because of the stigma that I'm going to explain in a second, then there is no actual advocacy to solve the problems. The third point here is that we tell you the military does not in fact become more popular. We still say that they don't provide a reason as to why the military inherently becomes this much more popular as a result of labor unions. If anything, we think it brings another layer of complexity which goes against the reason why someone would join, which they join to support their country and not to in what some might view as go against it in a labor union. And what we think finally, the final voter issue as to why you can't vote up here, is the idea of precedence in Europe. We think this is extremely important because it's the only precedence we go off of in this debate round. In my first speech, I read you 4 examples as to why it is actually, why it failed in Europe. We tell you there were coordination issues. We tell you that there wasn't enough that people weren't able to get adequate funding and resources. We tell you that it overlapped with existing organizations. And we also tell you that there was limited influence from the labor unions. These are 4 distinct reasons why you know that a plan that you vote government on will not work. Furthermore, we lead this into our first op voter issue, which is that organization and operations fall down. We tell you that since there is no cohesion as a result of these labor unions, as we can see from EuroMill, you then know that the operations are not going to be as cohesive, and it means that the United States loses their swift response to emergencies. This inherently means that we are less equipped as a nation to deal with responsibility globally, and it means that we lose hedge overall, which is a clean voting issue you can look at right there. The second one, though, is that we tell you that the military becomes stigmatized. We tell you that we think that people look like traitors to a nation if they decide to join this, and it means that people are likely just going to get strike bussed because their job's going to get hired out, which is the most likely. So then people are disincentivized from doing it, and joining a union becomes destigmatized. On the terms of veterans, Isha basically just cross what Isha tells you, which is this idea that like veterans are already getting the veterans are already getting solvency quo, and we tell you that still there is no solvency for anything that they say. Like, yes, we agree that these harms exist, however, we think that they don't actually do anything to solve it at the end of the day. The third and final op voter issue here is on the apolitical nature of it. We say the military needs to be apolitical because when they go into combat zones, it hurts when you have soldiers who are refusing to fight because they have a political disagreement with it. They join the military for that reason. We also think that it makes a worse masking effect as a result, as now people are going to be joining the military for a certain cause, but then not actually understanding why, and people lose trust within the military because they think that people within it are not actually genuine to the cause that they believe. That means that at the end of the day, you vote on the fact that there is no government solvency in this debate round, and even if there is, we think that operations still fall down, and there's a lack of bargaining power because, as they say themselves, the United States military can simply hire out the job. Thank you.
Okay, is everybody ready? In this speech, I'm just going to go over the two big voting issues in the round. The first is protecting the members of the armed forces. The second is about the efficacy of military operation. So on the first of the members of the armed forces, the opposition team has conceded everything we tell you about how bad the status quo is in this round. And the government response, or the opposition response throughout this round has been that there are incentives for the US military to change. But note, judges, that they have not ever actually told you that it's improving. They haven't been able to point to a single case study or piece of evidence that the world is improving. Why? Because it doesn't exist. Yes, Isha is correct in that there are organizations that protect that are helping veterans, but those are organizations, as in NGOs, that exist because the USFG won't help veterans, so they have to rely on like non-profit organizations to get their mental health care, which is ridiculous. Now, what we tell you is that the only route to advocacy is through unionization. The opposition response is that they won't unionize, or they won't have enough people to unionize to create change. Now, first of all, it's better to have the option to advocate for yourself than to not have the option in the first place. There you can be voting for the gov. But second, as my partner tells you, there aren't going to be some people that unionize. We don't think that the entire US military is going to decide to not unionize, to not advocate for themselves, to not try to make their lives better. That kind of goes against human intuition. So what does this mean? We think that even if some people unionize, they are going to be able to fight for themselves. At worst, at least this means they have a person in the room whose dedicated job is to fight for their rights. That doesn't exist in the status quo and the current system of military. But at best, this means that the entire military is unionized and they're able to fix lots and lots of issues. But even if you believe that only one battalion unionizes, that still means that one battalion has a person that is advocating for the rights, making their voices heard, and making sure their quality of life rises, making sure that they are taken care of, that they can feed themselves, that they can pay for medical care. That is where you're going to be voting Gov today. Now, two small things that have come out of the op block that I want to talk about. One, they talk about union busting and they say that like union busting will happen because they'll just break the laws. The reason that the USFG was able to break laws in the My Lai massacre was because it was happening in Vietnam. It isn't going to happen that like the United States federal government is just going to union bust within the United States. Also note that like a large percentage of federal employees are unionized, teachers are unionized, like police officers are unionized, all of these things. Second, on scabs.
Yeah, POO.
Yeah.
The comparative of other government jobs being unionized to like defend against harms to unions is new.
That's an example.
But I think it's the basis of your argument to the point at which like a tagline and then all of the war, I don't think makes sense to not be new. Okay.
I think it's
discussion.
just one example of seeing how the USFG doesn't trust bust other things, and also I'm responding to a new point that came out of Block.
Judge's discussion.
Okay, where was I? Okay, second on the point of just like hiring like PMCs as scabs, we think this isn't going to happen. Just look at the fact that we tell you that the USFG is trying so hard to recruit people into the military right now because they don't want to rely on private military contractors. Like, they come to my school every year, the military or both the Navy and the Army. They really don't want to rely on private military contractors. So, the second voting issue is about harming military operation. And this is what the opposition has said, but fundamentally the issue with their argument is they don't have any actual impacts. So they tell you that like there are going to be coordination issues, there's going to be overlap with other types of organizations. Now, first of all,
POO, that's new, because that's responding to the Euromil analysis, right? The overlap with other organizations, cooperation.
haven't responded.
So the
The fact that you're
Euromil,
addressing
okay,
it.
so the Euromil thing,
Wait,
like
can you
all,
guys just let me do
Sorry.
my response before you decide whether or not it's POO?
Okay.
Because
I
I
just meant because
have-
it's addressing
yeah.
your first speech content.
So, first of all, as my partner tells you, all of these things just don't make sense because as my partner says, like, there's not going to be like union members sitting in on every room for every single military decision, so we don't see how this is going to actually impact like the functioning of the military. But even if you do believe that this impacts the functioning of the military somewhat, at best what you have for the opposition is that like the military moves marginally slower. They haven't linked it to any deaths, any impact on like any actual people. Weigh the fact that you're actually able to help people increase their quality of life, reduce death, reduce rates of veteran suicide over like a marginal possible